Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Journal Star Sports Podcast. This is Dave Reynolds from the Journal Star Sports Department, welcoming our guest, Joe Dalfonso, my good friend. Joe, welcome.
Thank you, Dave. Good morning.
Joe, as many of you remember, is the former Sports Information Director at Bradley University. Long time there, 22 years maybe?
23, yep,
okay.
To be exact.
And has done various sports-related activities since then. I guess let's start there with what you've been doing since leaving Bradley. We'll come back to Bradley later, but just in terms of your moderating with the Missouri Valley Conference men's basketball tournament, and which parlayed into some NCAA men's basketball tournament moderating. Explain to us what exactly a moderator does.
Well, a moderator actually just keeps the order of things during the press conference interviews. Got to keep track of the time. Obviously, the coaches are only up there for 10 to 12, 15 minutes at a time, the student athletes as well. And you got to keep the order on who's going to ask questions when there are follow-up questions and things like that. So it's not brain surgery, but you have to be on top of your game just to make sure that you're a professional and everyone expects you to be that. So really, I'm just keeping order at the dais.
And what the public sees on TV or internet in regard to the press conferences is usually the coach or the player sitting on the dais responding to a question. And you are off camera. You're kind of the guy that officiates behind the scenes, sets the whole thing up. Give us the lay of the land a little bit, just in terms of how it all works, what's the order of how the reporters can ask questions. I know that there's differences depending on whether it's pregame or postgame.
Right. Well, your observations are correct, and it brings me. I'm going to tell a quick story here because the first time I did an NCAA event was when the Valley hosted an NCAA regional in St. Louis, and Indiana was coming through. They had won their first two games, and they were going to be in St. Louis, and Bobby Knight was the coach. And so I knew that he was chewing up moderators at the time of his career. And I told our good friend Dick Lean at the time, I said, my one goal for the weekend was to stay off Sports Center.
That's a good goal.
Yes, and I accomplished that goal. And then I've been reminded by the technicians and the people who run the cameras and the satellite that I should never appear on camera. So that's one of my main goals. They don't want me on there. They want the coaches. Everyone, yes, they focus on who's answering the questions. I'm just to the left or the right of the people on the dais, and I'm pointing to the microphone holders who is going to be next up. The second question, the third question, if there's a follow-up question. I'm just guiding traffic out there. Sometimes people are standing in the back of the room. What you don't know is that the lights are very bright, and I'm looking in, and sometimes I got to shade my eyes and find a question, and you work both sides of the room, and like I said, keep track of the time because there's another coach waiting post-game, and if he's the losing coach, he's not happy. He doesn't want to wait, and so you got to keep track of all that. And but the setup is, a dais, 4 or 5 chairs. There's a coach in the center, a couple of student athletes. I'm on the left or the right, and greet him on the way up and congratulate him on the way back.
And if I remember correctly, which I forget every year, but just in terms of how the questions are asked to whom. I think pregame is a little more informal.
Yes.
Or day before game, in which the coach and selected players will be on the dais. I think generally the coach makes an opening statement, and then direct questions can be directed to either the coach or the player during that session.
That's correct. Yeah, the day before the games, the tournament games of the Valley or the NCAA games, they're the fun days because no one's lost yet.
Right.
And you get some nice human interest stories out of there. Who's played against who, the coaching tree, where the coach came from. And the time flies because they're telling stories, and it is very informal. Post-game is a little more nerve-wracking because you do have a winner who's relieved and a loser whose season is over, be it at the conference level or the NCAA. And and the worst part about that is on the conference level, usually, sometimes you realize this is their last press conference. They are not coming back as a coach at that school, and you may really like the coach and you feel bad for him, and there's emotions in the room, and he's got to answer questions that, you know, are hard to ask, but they've got to be out there because people like you, that's their living, to ask the tough questions, and you know, that's what makes it tough. And so there's a range of emotions, but it's a job that you have to get done, and that's the way I look at it.
And speaking of that range of emotions, probably a couple of the most memorable post-game press conferences at the Valley Tournament were Royce Waltman and Barry Hinson when he left Missouri State. In both cases, the coach was, to most of us, on his way out of that school. And in both cases, if I remember right, they hadn't been told yet that that was the case. Royce was particularly candid in his answer, describing, you know, the whole process and being left to hang out in the wind during that whole time, and very, very honest. You know, you could hear a pin drop in that room because, you know, we just let him have the mic and describe what he was going through. Obviously, you remember that, and tell us what your memory
I do.
is.
And I remember Royce being asked if he would like to coach again because, you know, those coaches, they're coming into the tournament knowing they've got to win the tournament or else they're going to be dismissed. And we knew that about Royce at Indiana State at the time, and he was a great guy and easy to work with. And he was asked, do you want to coach again? And he says, yes, I do. He says, but I won't get that opportunity because I've just lost too much. In other words, I didn't cheat to win. I didn't get caught cheating. They're not dismissing me for that. They're dismissing me because I lost too much, and I probably won't get another chance. So he was very candid that day. Barry Hinson at Missouri State, the same way. Everybody loved Barry. He didn't get it done. He never won the tournament. He never went to the NCAA at Missouri State. And, you know, and people were choking back on that day because they knew it was the end of the era at Missouri State for him. I remember in the early days of the tournament when the SIDs had to stick around whether their teams won or lost. They were helping run the tournament. And then the next day, an SID would come up to, you know, Jack Watkins or the commissioner and say, I got to go. I got to go back to campus because we're having a news conference. And you know that coach was on his way out.
Sure.
So that's the nature of the beast. We know that. And, you know, we've got to deal with it in the news conference, and it's not always pleasant.
And not only sad moments, but some funny and happy ones as well. Obviously, the happy ones involving the winning coaches and players. But, you know, some of us remember some of those times of mirth with Barry Hinson, Coach Mo. Lots of these guys, you know, most of these coaches have a pretty good sense of humor.
Oh, absolutely.
And particularly the day before the game.
Absolutely, yes. The day before the game, like I said, is relaxing. And let's face it, we have a rooting interest both at the conference level and the NCAA level. I want to see good guys come back as winners. I want to see what they say and how they say it and things like that. I remember when Rich Herron of Southern Illinois won the tournament for the third straight year, and the losing coach had already come and gone, and then we're waiting for the Salukis because they had the ceremony on the court. And Rick shows up with his players, and he sits down, and he just starts talking. I mean, he just starts rambling about how they won and the players who did this and the players who did that and what a great team effort. And he went on for like 3 minutes, and I turned to him and I said, okay, Rick Herron will now open up with a statement. And he said, I made my statement. Give it to them. So he was so wound up and so happy. And this year, I mean, with the Loyola Ramblers, I mean, they brought 7 student athletes to the podium. We had never had 7 up there. And this was in a new room where the dais was smaller. And so we had to get those 7 plus Porter Mosier plus me, and they brought the trophy, and it was just a laugh-a-thon. I mean, it was wonderful, and it's too bad that it really had to end. We could have gone an hour because the student athletes were so gracious and so complimentary of their coach and their school. and Sister Jean and everyone else, and it was just a great moment.
And who would have guessed that they were just on the beginning of their trail toward the Final Four?
No. I just told someone this morning that if I had filled out a bracket, I would have had them losing against Miami in the first round, because I had seen Miami play and I was very impressed with them and thought, hey, this was a game that Loyola could play very well and still lose. And yet there they went to the Final Four. It's amazing, amazing run.
Yeah. And, you know, just speaking of Loyola, when they came into the league 5 years ago, I think most of us thought, is this a good move or not for the Valley? I mean, it was losing Creighton, a team that sold out an 18,000-seat arena regularly, had really established itself as a national program, or at least had a great identity. And Loyola came in, you know, they barely averaged 2,000 a game, not a very great gym, but, you know, obviously they're in Chicago. I think that was what the selling point was, you know, in a great market. You know, all of us said, well, yeah, they're in Chicago, but nobody in Chicago knows they're here.
That's correct.
And yet here we are 5 years later, and they're the toast of the town.
They are. You know, it's funny about those things, the way that happened, because I remember the same question marks being raised when Northern Iowa was taken into the league, and Commissioner Elgin was taking a lot of heat about that. This is our choice. This is who we're replacing, you know, Tulsa with, and so on and so forth. And they turned out to be a wonderful addition, and has given the Valley wonderful highlights in the NCAA tournament. Loyola was the same way. People raised eyebrows and said, what are we doing? And we know we couldn't replace Creighton with another Creighton, but there were a lot of people wondering if this was the right choice. On the other hand, you know, when we got Evansville in the league, everybody was throwing a parade. This is the greatest thing that we could have done. What a coup. And it has not turned out that well.
Right. Yeah, it is very interesting how that in Missouri State, I think people mostly welcomed at the time. Yeah. They'd had good success in their previous conferences, but and their success has been pretty steady. I mean, if you look at their whole program, they've been a good addition to the Valley.
Oh, absolutely. The women's basketball team went to the Final Four with Jackie Stiles. The baseball team's gone to the College World Series. They've gone to the NCAA tournament as a men's group. And that was not a bad move whatsoever. And I can go back as far as, you know, bringing Indiana State in, and of course they had Larry Bird at the time, and then Illinois State was brought into the league, and those were all great moves. I mean, it has been you know, a solid conference regardless of who's come and who's gone over the years, and I think it'll always be that way.
Yeah, you've seen a lot in the Valley over you came in '76, is that right?
Right, took
Valley
over
SID.
Yeah. Correct, yes.
Or the Bradley SID. And take us through those early years. Coach Stoll was in charge at Bradley. A different world then compared to now.
Totally different world, absolutely. First of all, no one got paid. I mean, the head coach wasn't getting paid. Yeah. Chuck Orsborn was the AD, and you know, he's the one that hired me, and he told me I'm not getting paid. So everything was laid out, but it was pretty much a family atmosphere. Everyone, all the coaches were teaching classes all the time. You know, there were no courtesy cars except for the head basketball coach. Chuck Bisher was coaching 2 sports. I mean, it was a common, simple time. It really was. And we played in the field house, obviously. And, you know, we had an All-American in Roger Fegley. And, you know, I jumped into that ship right away. But if I had to give a term, it was simple. You know, that's what we did. And everyone was sort of in the same boat. And so we didn't know any different. 2 years later, when Ron Ferguson showed up and Dick Versace showed up, it was a lot different. I mean, it was like a totally different world. We had, instead of people giving $50 to the athletic department and feeling good about themselves, we were corralling $500 donors in bushel baskets. I mean, the money was flowing in like you couldn't believe. It was so, and as fast as it came in, Dave, that's as fast as we spent it. I mean, stationery, paneling in the offices, courtesy cars, private planes for recruiting. I mean, it was crazy, and it happened so fast.
Yeah. And then right around the corner, the Civic Center was built, and a whole new arena for the Braves.
Right, exactly. Dick won the conference in 1980 in the second year, which turned things around even more. And then in 82, we won the conference again, and they got snubbed by the NCAA, went to the NIT, swept those 5 games, winning in Syracuse, winning 2 in the Garden, and then things exploded. Then we moved downtown in our first game against Loyola, as a matter of fact. Big history with Loyola, yes. And everybody was in tuxedos, and it was a big opening night, and we were averaging, 9,000, 10,000 people a game, and we were still good. We had local players, Eddie Matthews and people like that were running around the court. We had some success. And then we won the league again in '86, and we had an All-American in Hersey Hawkins, and it was the way that mid-majors think that, it could happen someday. And then those were the days it happened to Bradley.
And the term mid-major probably hadn't been invented yet during that time. I mean, it was just you were either a good basketball program or you weren't. I mean, it was starting to head that way just in terms of conference affiliation, I guess.
Right.
But obviously Bradley had been to the Final Four in '79 with Indiana State and had some great ranked teams in the 80s with Tulsa and Wichita State and Bradley.
Yes, when I was a student from '72 to '76, Memphis State was in the league, and they went to the Final Four, and Louisville was in the league, and they went to the Final Four, and then '79, Indiana State went to the Final Four, and then in '81, Wichita State went to the Elite Eight with Gene Smithson as the coach. So it was a power conference. It really was for basketball. And in the '80s, with Bradley, Wichita State, Tulsa, and Illinois State, I mean, those were 4 teams that were as good as any around the country in one conference, without question. And
what happened then? I mean, it got to a point where things were good for, a period of years. And then once Bradley won in '88, it seemed like the conference dovetailed downward.
Yes. Bradley took a dovetail downward for sure. After '88, Stan Olbeck, didn't keep it afloat as he should have or could have. And so you take one team out of the mix. I mean, Illinois State was just a solid program, but they weren't a national program. So they kept their winning ways, but they weren't making marks on a national basis. Tulsa tried its best. Wichita State went through some down years. And so at a conference level like the Missouri Valley, you really had to keep up, and you couldn't have a down year recruiting-wise, and these schools did. Eventually replaced by the Creightons and the Southern Illinois, who had solid years like that. And but nothing like the '80s when it was like the Wild Wild West in the Valley. Everybody was doing everything.
And then you mentioned Stan Albeck, and the first couple of years were great. Got the team to the NCAA tournament, and then the bottom kind of fell out, and the recruiting didn't sort of dried up.
Right, exactly. Stan was one of my favorite guys at all time at Bradley. I'd go in on Sunday morning to do my work, and there was a lot of work to do on Sundays because we were playing a lot of Monday games at the time. And I thought this was the perfect time to get a head start in the week. But the door would open, and Stan would walk in with his cup of coffee and sit down and put his feet on my desk and say, "What's new, Joe? Tell me what's going on around the league." So, there went an hour of my day. But he was like that. I mean, he was so confident in his abilities and gregarious, and everybody liked Stan. And you hate to see when the good guys don't produce and they've got to be let go. And I remember when Ron Ferguson, called me in and said, we've got to let, Stan go. And here are 2 press releases, one that he's resigned and one that he's been fired. I'll let you know which one we're using. And so, he was fired. He didn't want to resign. And then Coach Molinari came through the door, and
a big change.
A big change. You always hire opposite, Dave. You know that. And, that really changed my life a lot. First of all, he was the first head coach that I worked with who was younger than I was, just by a few months. But everybody else, was older, and we were the same age. Mo and I were raising families at the exact same time, and we had a lot of commonalities. And but he ran a program a lot differently. Now, he was a lot like Joe Stoll in the fact that he loved practice probably more than the games. But Mo was just difficult to deal with because he had his Mo way to do things, and there was no other way to do things. And you had to fall in line with that. And he gave me a lot of headaches. But a great guy. To this day, we keep in touch, and I kid him. He got inducted into the IBCA Hall of Fame over the past year, and I sent him a text and I congratulated him, and I told him, I said, okay, now everybody's in. Now that you're in, so
the last holdout.
Exactly. So anyway, he appreciated the humor, and he always has, and we keep in touch. But that was different. I mean, he built it from the ground up. He really bottomed the program out and built it his way, and won a conference championship in '96 and went to the NCAA tournament.
You mentioned the Mo way of doing things. Give us a little insight there.
It's hard to describe, but I'll tell you, we had a walk-on one year, a kid from Naperville, who I can't remember his name, but he was a 6'6" forward and nice kid, but he was brought to campus and he's going to redshirt. Okay, so it wasn't a walk-on; he was a recruited player, but he was going to redshirt.
Michael Collins?
It could be, yes, Michael Collins,
yeah.
Right. And so we had a game one night, and it's January. And I go down to the Civic Center early and setting up things like that. And I see Michael Collins on the court, and he's in his warm-ups, and he's shooting around. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, So I walked up to Pat Donahue, the assistant coach at the time, and I said, oh, Michael Collins is his warm-ups. And Pat says to me, and this is 5:30 for a 7 o'clock game, yeah, we activated him today. And I said, you're kidding me. I said, you didn't tell me that. No, it was just decided. Oh, by the way, he's starting tonight.
I remember that night well.
Right. So, as a publicist, as an SID who was in charge of making sure his name's in a computer for stats,
sure.
I had to do a lot of scrambling. He's not in any program. The team doesn't know, and the scores table doesn't know. So that was the Mo way, really.
Right,
I mean, it was, okay, we're going to make this decision, and you'll love it. Well, I didn't love it.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah.
Mo was a great guy from my perspective to work with because he was so quotable, but you never really knew when you were going to get a hold of him because time really was not part of his life, and being on time was not. I don't know if he owned a watch, but
probably not.
I
Probably
doubt
not. He'd walk in my office at times, Dave, and ask me a question, and I could have answered him by saying the pink elephants aren't due until 3 o'clock, and he would never have heard the answer because he wasn't paying attention to anything I said. And he'd look at my desk and look at a few stats and say thanks and leave.
Yeah.
And probably even forgot he came in to ask a question.
And Mo was the last coach that you worked with at Bradley.
Yes.
He was replaced by Jim Less after you'd already departed the university. But you still stayed in touch, and you did some TV work during those years, I think, and still stayed in touch with the program.
In fact, it was Mo that recommended me to WEK when Ron Ferguson wasn't going to do the color commentary any longer. Mo said, get this guy. And so I teamed up with Lee Hall and did some TV for, I think, 4 or 5 years when Coach Mo was the coach, and then Coach Les. And that was a heck of a lot of fun. I saw it from a different perspective. I had done some radio work, but not TV. And Lee Hall was a professional, and he was great. And we worked well together, and got to travel a little bit more. And so that was good.
Did you just sort of jump into that? Did you have any kind of prep for the TV gig?
Not like you would think,
Yeah.
no. You know, I did an interview with them. We had an audition, and that was kind of easy for me. You know, I'm a natural-born talker, you know that. And in fact, when my wife would come to the games and we would be doing home games, she would sit up in the upper bowl and she would tell her friend, she says, "Joe's talking now." And her friend would say, "Well, how do you know that?" She says, "Well, he's moving his hands." So she always knew that I was
the Italian way, right?
Exactly right. So that was not hard for me.
Right.
I did some work for Channel 47 on campus when they were doing basketball specials, and I did voiceovers and interviews and things like that, but nothing like live TV. So, but it came easy. And like I said, Lee made it easy for all of us. Steve Shaw was great, and it was a good gig for a while. Then they lost the rights, and that was that.
Right. And another gig that you've done with your wife in recent years is the foreign trip. I think you took, was it last year to Spain?
Yes.
And you were actually there with, was it the Tulane basketball team?
Yep.
And quite an experience on that trip.
Well, you know, I had a student assistant years ago, probably my best student assistant of all time, Brett Seymour, back in the 90s, and he graduated and went on and started working for Sports Tours International, owned by Lee Frederick, who was a Bradley grad.
Former Bradley player.
Yeah, right. And so they've been in Milwaukee for years. And when I retired from working every day, Brett asked me, he said, "Would you be willing to, you know, be a host on tours?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, whatever." Well, the first two times he asked me, I had to decline because of family matters and things like that. And I thought I was off the grid, really. But he called last July, and said, "Can you go to Spain with Tulane's men's basketball?" He gave me like 10 days notice. He said, "We've had two people that were going to go back out, and he said, and you can bring Dawn." And that sold it. And she came home, and I said, "We're going to Spain." So we went with Tulane. And we went to Madrid and Barcelona, and it was 11 days for us, 10 days for them. We were there for the terrorist attacks, you know, in late August in Barcelona, which, you know, we were there. We were on the spot 40 minutes before it happened, but we were 2 miles away when it happened.
Okay.
But we made some news there. It was a wonderful trip. I think we're on the grid to go again in the future. So, you know, if the dates work out, we'll go again. Sure. It's good. We can speak the language. You know, Dawn holds the microphone during all the interviews that I do, and you know, she knows Coach Speak, and she knows the game, and she acts like the team mom over there, and they appreciate that. So we make a good team.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yep.
I mean, I've witnessed that personally for many years, but
in the front row, that's right.
Dawn is, we've often discussed, is the mic holder for the Valley tournament. And she always admonishes me to make sure my cell phone is silenced, which it's gone off a couple of times. It disrupted the room, of course.
Rule number one, that's all it is. This year, for the first time, we did 3 tournaments in March. We did the Valley in St. Louis. We did the NCAA first and second round in Nashville with other friends from Washington, retired teachers. And then we turned right around from 24 hours, and we did Omaha, the regionals. And we had never done that before. And we seemed like we were gone the entire month, but it was a lot of fun. And 2 good venues, great people to work with, and hopefully, you know, we can do that again. But that was a lot.
As you look forward, you want to continue this gig with the Valley. Obviously, they're good people, and they like having you, and you fill that role well. Yeah,
and it's nothing that I can get too old to do. I think you know, I'm over 60 now, and I can do that. I can wear a tie for 4 days. It's not a big deal, and do
it's a big deal for the Sportswriters.
Exactly. Yeah. So no, I can do that. And next year we're already penciled in for Tulsa in the NCAA, and the Valley is hosting a regional in Kansas City, so we have a shot to do, you know, 3 more in March. And right now it seems like a lot. You know, when it comes up to it, it looks like fun. So I think we'll do that again.
Well, this has been fun. Our time has elapsed very quickly here. Enjoyed our visit today with Joe Dalfonso, former Bradley Sports Information Director and current moderator for the Missouri Valley Conference men's basketball tournament, and some NCAA events as well. So our thanks to Joe for joining us.
My pleasure.
We'll have you back again, I'm sure.
I'll be ready.
All right. Once again, this is a Journal Star podcast signing off. If you want to subscribe to the Journal Star, give us a call, 309-686-3161. Thanks again. So long for now.